Hi, good evening. This is Roy from Sulphur City Foundry. Just shooting a quick video. Excuse the slightly dodgy lighting, it's the evening. My normal rig isn't set up. But what I wanted to talk to you today was a little bit about some of the budget saber options that are popping up out of China at the moment. Now, we've started stocking these at Sulphur City Foundry as a request for some of the younger guys, the teenagers and the kids wanting to get into a bit of saber swinging, but obviously mum and dad are probably doing it, and getting one for junior is normally can be a little bit cost prohibitive. So this is just really to help people into the hobby. So what I'm doing today is just shooting a bit of a comparison on what you can expect from a budget saber coming out of China versus some of the mainstream manufacturers. So what we have at the moment is just a random example of one of the sabers we stock here at Sulphur City Foundry. We've called this one the Faithful, and what I've done is dismantle it to give you an overview of the electronics, which is I think something that's kind of missing off YouTube at the moment. Now, we did used to stock budget sabers out of China probably about 12-14 months ago. We actually stopped because we didn't have too much faith in the quality of the electronics installs, so we kind of erred away from them. But this is something we've revisited lately, like I said, at a request of some of the people wanting to get into sabers here in New Zealand. And I'm glad to say there have been a few improvements. They're certainly still built to a price point. In no means are these as refined as some of the more mainstream manufacturers and mainstream electronics, but it's a noisy light up glowing stick that you can use at saber meets. So let's give it a bit of an overview, and we'll go through what you can expect. Well, first off, it's boxed under that aluminium body. As you can imagine, these will pop off the production lines en masse. Like I said, these will come straight from China. One thing we found from these, they're fairly okay. This is actually quite a weighty hilt. It's not too bad. This is one of the more nicer detailings hilts we kind of stock here. A lot of them tend to be quite plain, mainly because they are cheap to produce. One thing I will note is quality control direct from China is not as stringent as you would expect or get from some of the more mainstream manufacturers. Even though they do actually get the stuff made in China, their quality control internally processes are actually quite a bit more onto it, and they're less likely to pass some of the stuff that these guys do when they ship out of China direct. So all in all, it's actually not a bad tidy little hilt. When we received this, the anodized part was actually quite tidy. The surface, the silver parts, had a lot of handling marks and minor scratches and stuff that shouldn't be there. These guys really do bounce them around in the factory, and they don't really finish them afterwards. So what we've done is took a little bit of time. We've actually cleaned up all of the aluminium, we've brushed it, sanded it, used some wet and dry on it, and finally we've given it a bit of a metal polish just to bring it up a little bit, and that has improved the look of the saber. Still a couple of nicks out of the things, a couple of little dents in the metal, but like I said, you're dealing with a budget saber here, so unfortunately that's the reality of dealing with these budget sabers. Like I said, they're coming straight from a Chinese factory. Their quality control might not be as picky as some of the big mainstream guys. That said, we have seen nicks and hilts from Saber Forge, not so much Saber Trio. They're actually anal about their quality control at Saber Trio, I'm glad to say, and if something does creep through, they sort it out. Saber Forge, they do have the occasional nicks in the hilts that we've received, but maybe that's just part and parcel again of dealing with what is a relatively budget, no, well, price conscious hilt. You know, the Saberforge stuff is actually incredibly well priced for the detailing, so yeah, some people just tend to roll with it. Okay, electronics. As an installer, this is the area that I've previously been quite disappointed on, and like I said, it's the reason we stopped stocking these in the first place. I'm glad to say they've improved. It's still definitely built to a budget. These aren't expensive parts by any means. So I'm going to start at the heatsink. So this is what you get for a heatsink. It's actually a plastic lens with the RGB LED sandwiched in there, and that's your heatsink at the bottom. So no enclosed heatsink body, just an aluminium heatsink. The cross section on that is a lot of air there. It will allow the air to get in there to disperse the heat, but also there's not a lot of contact with the base of the LED, which is something that you kind of do want on an LED. You don't want these things to run hot. Okay, so that's definitely a cheap assembly for the LED. Most mainstream manufacturers, you'll actually get one of these, which will be an aluminium body heatsink with a copper base. The copper base will take got a good surface area, so with the LED attached to that, sucks the heat out and then distributes it throughout the rest of the metal body and cools the LED that way. That's going to be a lot more effective than that, but like I said, you get what you pay for. Okay, again, I'm not being overly critical, I'm just telling you what you get for a budget saver. The soundboard, well, first off, these guys will tout these things as saying, hey, this thing now comes with a chassis. Now, that's a very loose definition of the word. What they actually mean is there's a PCB board with a couple of standoffs which screw onto the body. That's your chassis. Yeah, that's not what most people in the Saber community would call a chassis, but like I said, you're working to a price point, that is what you're going to get on one of these budget Sabers. And a chassis, for those of you, we'll do a comparison with some other Sabers later, you know, it'll be a 3D printed chassis to hold all of your electronics and stop them kind of jiggling around. The only thing that stops this thing jiggling around are the two screws that holds the chassis onto the inside of the body. Sensors on these things, they're still using ball bearing motion sensors, I think. That could be that thing, and that's a clash sensor, that's a reed switch. So clash detection and motion is still, oh, that could be the rumble meter actually, I'm not sure. Okay, I can't see any of the old ball bearing motion components on there that used to get on the old board, so maybe they've got a motion sensor, but they're still using a reed switch for clash. So I'm not quite sure what that is. This thing does vibrate, and I'll get onto that a little bit later, but that's what you get for the board. It's alright, cheap board, makes noise, and kind of does the job, but like I said, definitely built to a price point now. Now what used to scare us was the batteries on these things. I've actually taken a Chinese imported Saber apart before, and I actually found the battery, rather than having wires soldered onto it, actually had spring clips which were taped on with painter's tape, you know, that kind of paper tape that you use when you're lining the edge of the walls and stuff, and that was the installation direct from one of the factories back in the day. I haven't pulled this apart, but I'm guessing there's actually, these things are soldered together now, which is nice to see. It's a pretty basic thing. But again, no chassis, there's actually just a little bit of high density foam that stops it rattling around in the hilts. Now it does the job. Okay, just again, this thing's built for a price. That will stop the thing rattling around in the hilt okay. There was a bit of a space between that and the bottom of the speaker. They basically chucked a bit of packing noodle in there to stop it thing rattling around, and then you've got a I think it's a 23 or 24mm speaker that's actually glued into the pommel at the bottom of the hilt. Specs on these were 2000 mAh batteries. This one says 2200 on there. Lithium ion batteries out of China you kind of take with a pinch of salt. The spec in the manual says that's a 1200, but obviously it's not. I'm not going to take it apart and do a discharge test. I've got the ability to do that, but I'm not going to do it. Printed on the side of this, it says it's a 2200 milliamp hour lithium ion battery. It's not a protected cell. I've compared it to protected and unprotected cells. If you have a protected cell, you tend to have a small PCB attached to the end of your lithium ion battery. It makes it a little bit longer. I don't know if you can see that. It's probably 2 mil longer than the blue one. So what that does, if you get a short across those terminals, that stops your cell short circuiting, discharging its load all at once, heating up and making pretty fireworks. More than from what I understand, there's discharge protection on the board, but that's no use if you actually get maybe that black, say that red wire pops out, that black wire pops out and they touch, you got a short circuit. That thing's going to get very hot and turn into a firework very quickly. If you've got the PCB on the battery, that doesn't happen. But that's what you get for a budget saber built for a price point. I said not being critical, just pointing out the differences, and it's something to be aware of if you are purchasing one of these. Okay, so the speaker seems to be pretty good. I fired this up. It actually generates a pretty good sound. When you fire this thing up, actually, it's very usable as a saber. I'd be happy using it, loaning it out. Obviously I prefer to use some of my more mainstream hilts, but when you're actually swinging one of these things around, it does the job. But like I said, that's just a little bit of an overview of the physical differences between the hilt and the electronics. Something else I want to touch on as well. We looked at the board physically earlier, but let's talk about the menu system. The logic system on this, obviously people haven't really done much in terms of user experience. They've just crammed the features on there. Is absolutely bizarre. When the saber's off, you can actually first off, there's no beep to let you know where you are in the menu system. It runs off a vibration. So imagine you're you got your finger on a pulse, kind of feels like that. Bzz, bzz, bzz. Tells you how many seconds you're holding down the button and where you are in the menu. There's no audible cues to that whatsoever, so there's going to be a bit of a learning curve on this. So normally with a nice refined board like the stuff you get from Nigon or Plector Labs or Saberforge or the like, all of your configuration settings are kind of done with the saber off. Then you power on your saber, and then you've got blaster blocks and all those little goodies. The menu systems on these are a bit of a mishmash. Like I said, with the saber off, you can switch between your sound fonts. Okay, that's fair enough. You can also put it into a silent mode and turn your sound on and off. Now you'd also expect to be able to set your blade pulse and everything, and the color of your saber with the saber turned off. But they kind of turn it on their head, and they've allowed you to kind of do this stuff on the fly. So how this menu system works with your saber turned on, if you hold down the press the button once for kind of 1 second, which is where you'd expect your blaster blocks to be, fast reactive stuff, it actually cycles through light modes, and that's a different frequency of flashing on and off, like a shimmer, full on, a slow pulse, all sorts of stuff. So instead of doing a blaster block, all of a sudden your light mode's changed. If you do want a blaster block, you've got to hold it down for 2 seconds or 2 vibrations, and that goes into a lock-up mode, and it will stay in lock-up mode until you hold it for another 2 seconds and come out of it. So to me, that's not as responsive as a refined board would be. If you go into lock-up, you don't want to wait 2 seconds for it to start making the lock-up sound. But hey, these are budget boards. Like I said, they are built to a price point. Now, holding these things for 3 seconds allows you to change your color on the fly. So that's something that could be useful. I think the Profi boards do this. It allows on the fly color changing with the Saber turned on. So hold it down, you get 3 buzzes, and all of a sudden, and you might switch from green to green red. Hold it down for another 3 buzzes, you switch to full red. Hold it down for another 3 buzzes, you mix to a purple, which is a mix of red and blue, and so on. Okay, so you can change colors on the fly. Maybe not. That's maybe an interesting feature. Now, volume adjustment is holding it down for 3.5 seconds or 4 vibrations. You can actually change between a low and a high volume on the Saber, despite the fact that you set the sound on and off with the Saber turned off. Like I said, it's a bit of a mishmash on a menu. The logic really needs to be tidied up on these things, and if it does, it would make the user experience a little bit more. But like I said, you're paying a fraction of what you pay from the mainstream manufacturer, so you're going to have to live with that, unfortunately. What else happens? And that's pretty much. And to turn it off, you've got to hold the thing down for sort of 4 seconds, which is 5 vibrations, and your Saber will turn off. And then a few seconds later, it says sleeping or something along those lines. So let me just fire it up. That's probably out of deep sleep. Oops. So that's set to green. So I'll hold it down for 2, 3, 4, 5 vibrations. It turns off, and it will talk to you in a minute. Sleeping. It says sleeping. Okay. Yeah, but that's a bit of a mishmash of a menu system, but that's just something that you're going to have to get used to. Really confused me that there were no audible cues going through the different parts of the menu. And you had to refer to the manual, which is actually a piece of A4 paper, to actually work out what exactly was going on. Cool. So, this will do you. It's if you want to get into swinging a Saber, it will certainly do the job. Durability is yet to be seen. Doesn't look too bad. At the worst, everything's repairable. So in terms of talking about being repairable, I want to talk about upgradability. So say your electronics fail after 6 months, you've accepted the fact that's what you get with the budget Saber. That said, my buddy's had one of these going for 2 years. I gave it to him for his birthday 2 years ago. It's still going fine. But say you want to upgrade this thing at a later stage. Well, you'll be glad to know that these heat sinks do fit the hilt. They fit in there quite nicely. You might have a little bit of issue fitting the switches in. You'll have to be quite creative about how you get the switches and your recharge port to sit in there. Say your board fails, what I'd actually do would be to chop the board, disconnect everything, and still use that as a little bit of a caddy to hold a switch and a recharge port there. And what I'd do would be to fit the battery and board in a bit further down the hilt, because you've got a little bit of space there taken up with your lovely packing material. Now the inside diameter on the electronics area here is a little bit less than what you have up at the emitter end of the Saber. It only measures at about 24.9mm, which is a little bit crazy, because most Sabers tend to either be a standard 25mm inside, kind of what you get from 7 chambers and the like. Obviously Ultra Sabers are big chunky ones at about 33. What a Saber Forge, they must be about 29 internally. So it's a really skinny hilt. You can get chassis like this. This is a 25mm chassis that's made to fit the 7 chambers. Obviously that's a 24.9 hilt, so it won't fit in. If you've got somebody with a 3D printer, you can kind of play around with the scaling and the wall thickness on these things, and at the worst maybe just sand the chassis a little bit and that will eventually slide in. I had to do that recently with a One Replica's Qui-Gon Jinn installation. I used one of these chassis, played around on my 3D printers and just shaved it a little bit and managed to use that for an installation. Yeah, once you've got one of those chassis in, you'll be able to squeeze in a small board like a Pico Crumble, Profi board or something like that. So there is the option to upgrade the electronics in these things. Like I said, the only issue that you might have will be getting these switches to fit in there. Like I said, they fit into the hilt from underneath, so there's no lip for the switch to sit on like you get in you know, SaberForge for example. Obviously there's no, that's drilled out so you can't thread it like Saber Trio do. But like I said, I'm pretty sure you could work a little bit of a hack, or if you know somebody who can design little caddies on their 3D printer, you could sort something that fits in there. Yeah, so upgradability, there is a path now if you want to hang on to it, but I mean, my gut feeling would be that you probably play around with this for 6 months, decide you like the look of everyone else's more mainstream sexier sabers, and this would be reserved to being your loner, so for you to drag a buddy along to a meeting. Okay, so there we go, that's the overview of one of these. Price point, I mean, we sell these for it's like 220 New Zealand dollars. So that's a spec for a RGB saber, which makes sounds, lights up, and allows you to get along to your saber meets. Mainstream manufacturers, you might be looking around about 550 New Zealand dollars. So you can see there's a massive price difference there. But like I said, you will, after a while, probably start noticing how much of a budget these things are built to and want something a little bit more. But that said, they're pretty functional as they are. In terms of charging these things, your more mainstream sabers will come with a proper dedicated lithium-ion smart charger. These literally come with a USB cable which plugs into the recharge port there that you have to plug into a 5-volt supply. I'd suggest you use one of these. You can use a USB port on your PC as well if your PC or laptop is able to supply a big enough current to charge these things. But I'd always err on the side of caution. I'd much rather one of these blow up due to an issue with the board on here than a $1,000 laptop. So go and get yourself a cheap $5 USB 5-volt gizmo. Don't do what I've seen some people do, which is go, oh, I know the look of that thing, I'll plug in my laptop charger. Laptops charge at about 19 volts, not 5 volts. So plug a laptop charger in there, you're going to fry your saber. Okay, so what do we talk about now? So okay, let's compare these two. We've talked about what you get for a budget. Let's compare these to some more mainstream sabers. Okay, so straight off you might go, okay, that's a Saber Trio Aaron. I really love that saber, it's awesome. You might go, okay, that's not too bad. And to be honest, that's not too bad. I mean, the detailing on this is one of the more detailed hilts you can get coming out of China at the moment, from the Chinese wholesalers. A lot of people are reselling those budget sabers, but I will say that weight wise, big difference. This is actually quite a lightweight little buddy. There's definitely more heft to the kind of hilts that you get out of Saber Trio and SaberForge, for example. You will feel that they're quite lightweight, but like I said, they're still usable, and that's what you get for a budget hilt. Now in terms of electronics, this is where you see the most differences. As we spoke before, these things have already got superior heat sinks. This is a stunt, so it doesn't have a board in it yet, but you can see even a stunt with a lithium ion upgrade, which is recommended when you get your Saber chairs from us. Definitely get a lithium ion upgrade. It comes with a absolutely awesome chassis, really nice Delrin chassis, beautifully made. Everything goes together perfectly. You don't need packing foam to stop the thing rattling, and you do notice that that's a more expensive Saber. Like I said, after 6 months of using your budget one, you might have saved up a few more pennies, seen everyone else's Sabers at your meets and gone, right, I fancy grabbing myself a second, more higher end Saber. Now detailing, there's more detailing in these as well. On the surface of it that might look pretty samey, but I mean, for example, on the hilt here there's just a single spiral grip. That's very easy to do on the lathe. You just set the lathe to auto walk and take a chunk out of the aluminium, a couple of little ridges, and this exposed stuff. That's where most of the machining has been done on this hilt. I don't dislike it, I actually think it looks quite snazzy, but like I said, that's probably one of the more fancier hilts that we sell here at the moment. There is a lot more work that goes into producing these. That's an old Saber Forge Xiphos. They actually do a new model for 75 US empty, and to me there's more heft, more weight, they feel more solid, and I do think they're worth the extra. Okay, that's me personally, but like I said, we're looking at comparisons at the moment. You know, you get what you pay for. So we talked about manufacturing quality control. I said that fancy hilt that we had here, we had to tidy up a bit. I was a little bit disappointed about that. I have been quite vocal in going back to the supplier and explaining that that stuff doesn't fly. He needs to do a better job at his end, and he's assured me that hopefully the stuff turning up in the future I won't have to tidy up. That said, we also got a crossguard at the same time in the same shipment, and that's a simple Saber, and that's pretty much fault free. There's no cosmetic issues with that at the moment, not that I've seen. There might be an occasional small nick tucked away somewhere which I haven't found yet, but that's actually pretty tidy. And like I said, with this one it seemed to be the exposed metal which had the issues. Okay. I have seen budget ones in the past. They have had nicks out of them as well. They haven't been I've had them come through when we used to sell them with dodgy anodized finishes on them, but they haven't been in the bath long enough properly. It was almost like a two-tone, or the anodizing was too thin, and like I said, the factories will ship them to you like that because their quality control is perhaps not as stringent as we would like it to be. So if you're buying a budget Saber, that is something to be aware of once again. Yeah, very bizarre. But I mean, this is quite a cheap little crossguard as well. To get a cross charge from Saber Forge, you're looking at about, to get them into New Zealand, about 1,000 New Zealand dollars once they come through customs. These rocked up for about 280, I think we've got them on the site for. And they're actually pretty good. Same menu system, they're not RGB, but I wouldn't be unhappy to receive one of those. Pretty boring in terms of machining. A lot of it's radial machining. There's no highlights or anything on there. You could abrase it. This is a cheap toy that I had for my got for my son about 1.5 to 2 years ago. He's trashed it, dropped it. Currently it's empty. We're waiting another install. This is a really cheap and nasty one. Even comes with Chinese characters on the pommel. Very bizarre. But yeah, that is something you could do to sort of abrasion weather it and kind of put highlights on it and everything. You can put a leather wrap on there, little fetish hang things off there, all sorts. But from a crossguard point of view, I think that's actually really good value, this one. That one I'm really pleased with. Haven't had to tidy that one up at all. What do I touch on now? Okay, last thing in the comparison is, it's not all about hilts. We have to talk about the blades. Now, blades out of China, I mean, all blades come from China anyway. Anything you get from a mainstream manufacturer is going to come out of China. The biggest issue we've found with these budget sabers is they will bulk buy a lot of blades from another wholesaler, and that's pretty much what you get. You will find some variation in what's specified versus what you actually receive sometimes. We were told that these were going to come with 2.5 mil walled blades, 88 centimeters long. We got 92 centimeter long 2 mil wall blades. Actually, they measured at 1.9. And then you go back and they say, oh no, they're fine for heavy dueling. Which, I mean, we always specify this budget stuff. We err on the side of caution. We say it's light dueling only. If your blades come back to us trashed, we're going to say, hey, we did tell you. Mainly because we know, you know, what you get blade wise with these budget sabers. So at the moment these are shipping with 1.9 mil, call it 2 mil, walled 92 centimeter blades. Now the weird thing with that is, we saw the blades when they came in. I've had one of those blades for about 1.5 years, and it's been used as the loaner saber at our local meets here in Rotorua every fortnight for going on 2 years, and I think I've had to replace the tip once on it. Other than that, it's stood up against all of the 3 mil saber forged blades, all of the 3 mil heavy Ultra Sabers blades. It seems to be less rigid and a little bit more flexy. No denting on the tubes or anything. So as annoyed as I was not to get the correct the blades that were specified come through, I do know that these blades can actually take a bit of a beating, so I'm not too stressed on that, but we're going to see how they go. Blade tolerances is the biggest, the weirdest thing on these budget sabers as well. Actually, I'll just talk about the blade sizes. Blades across the saber community, they either come at 1 inch, which is from your US manufacturers, or they come out at 25 mil, which is what you tend to find with the manufacturers that come out of Europe. So 1 inch is 25.4 mil. The 25 mil blades tend to be about 25. We received these blades at 25.3. These are supposed to be 25 mil hilts, so they were supposed to be 25 mil blades. They came at 25.3, and they actually fit perfectly into these blades, and I'm like, ooh, excellent. Maybe a 25.4 mil blade will fit in there. Now I managed to forcibly push a saber forged blade all the way into the hilts. Saber Trio went in with a little bit of encouragement. The Ultra Sabers was 25.5 mil according to my calipers, which fitted beautifully in the Saber Trio and the Saber Forge and the Ultra Sabers, but was too tight to go in one of these. So these budget hilts do have quite a tight emitter, so you might not be able to get every single US spec'd blade squeezed in here if you want to go with a replacement blade. That said, the hilts that come from UK manufacturers, like your KR Sabers flagship hilt, everything from 7 chambers is spec'd for a tighter emitter as well. You really it's very difficult to actually squeeze some of the 1 inch blades into there. So tolerances will be different from batch to batch on blades, from manufacturer to manufacturer. Just be aware that these also have quite tight emitters. Like I said, so you might have to run with the blades that come out of the budget places in China in terms of a fit. But like I said, we've had one of those in our loaner Saber for going on 2 years, and it's actually stood up rather well. What I would do, they don't have the best diffusion in them. You can see some of the film, and you only get kind of one wrap of the film inside. What I'd suggest is actually getting a little bit of sandpaper, do what Saber Trio do, and sand the outside of the blade. You tend to find that it makes it more opaque, and the light comes to the surface of the blade a lot more. Okay, so that's kind of a bit of a wrap up and an overview on these budget Sabers. Like I said, we've got this modelled in, and we've got this crossguard. So the big question is, are they worth it? Well, like I said, that's an RGB Saber for about $230. I'll have to double check the price on our website. Like I said, something coming from a mainstream manufacturer will kind of cost you about $550 to $600. So in terms of allowing people to get into the Saber community, yeah, they're not a bad buy. They used to be really scary in terms of the electronics builds a while ago, but they all seem to be cleaned up a little bit now. They're still built for a budget, but it's I certainly wouldn't build anything like that. But I wouldn't charge $230 either. I'd charge a lot more because I'd use more higher end components. So if you're on a budget, yeah, it'll do the job. Getting that crossguard in for a slightly more, I think is actually exceptional value. And if somebody wanted a crossguard for cosplay or dueling, that's not a bad option either. But like I said, just be aware you are getting what you pay for. So as a first step, we always say that these are your first step into a bigger world, the Obi Kenobi quote, and that's what these are here for. They get you swinging, get you into the hobby, you see if you like it, hopefully they don't break too much, and they get you through the first few months to the point that you want to start investing in slightly more mainstream and better quality sabers. Like I said, you might move on to Saber Forge, Saber Trio. We really recommend those. We kind of really do like those down here in the NZ community. Saber Forge always detract their haters. It's not deserved. They have their faults, but they're actually a lot better than the community gives them recognition for. They're your good dueling sabers, and then from there you might move on to collecting and your fancier ones. So you might start picking up your core band 39 sabers and your more higher end display pieces. But yeah, there's a first step. Yeah, they're not a bad investment. They tend to come strictly with a 3-month warranty on them, and you can see why. They are a budget build, but like I said, if they do break, they're fixable. They are upgradable, and if you want to sell it on in maybe 3 to 6 months time to help fund the purchase of a higher end saber, they're probably going to keep their value quite well as well. So my mind's kind of changed on these. We've gone from not stocking them to actually thinking they're not a bad little option for your first step into swinging a saber. Okay, well hopefully that gave you a few more insights than are currently out there on the web. I'm going to wrap up the video. Got any questions, pop it in the video comments below. I am very responsive and I will answer questions on this. And you have a great day. Enjoy your sabers. Bye bye.